You want me to start from the beginning. That's funny. People always say that. Start from the beginning. Like there's a clean line you can walk back to. Like memory is a road and not a flooded field where half the markers are gone and the ones still standing have been moved by somebody who didn't want you finding your way home. But fine, you've got your little recorder there. You've got your kind face and your folder full of my name spelled 3 different ways. So I'll talk. Just don't interrupt me when I lose the thread. I lose it sometimes. I'm old now. Older than I had any right to get, considering. My name is Aldrich Venn, though nobody called me Venn after a certain point. After a certain point, they just called me him. You know the way people do. They don't say the name of a thing they're afraid of. They point with their chins. I was a guard, not a famous one, not at first. I stood at doors for 11 years before any of this, and I'll tell you the honest truth, I was good at standing at doors. There's an art to it people don't understand. You have to be present and absent at the same time. You have to be a wall that breathes. The court walked past me 1,000 times and never once saw my face. That was the job. That was me doing the job well. The king back then, and I mean the old King Charles before he was what he became, he had this habit. He'd nod at the guards, just a small thing, a tip of the head as he passed, like he was acknowledging the furniture had feelings. Most royals don't do that. Most royals look through you like glass, but Charles nodded, and I'm ashamed to say how much that nod meant to a man like me. I'd have walked into fire for that nod. I nearly did. You're writing that down. Don't. That part doesn't matter. It matters, leave it. Let me tell you about the West Wing. The palace had 4 wings like most do, arranged around the inner court. North was administration, clerks, ledgers, the smell of ink and cold tea. East was the royal apartments. South was for guests, ambassadors, the people you had to impress and couldn't trust. And West. West was closed. It had been closed since before my time. There was a story, there's always a story, that the West Wing had flooded during the old Queen's reign, that the foundations were rotten, that the whole thing would come down if you so much as breathed on it wrong. So it was sealed, boarded at the connecting corridor. A single door, iron, with a lock the size of my fist, and in front of that door always a guard. That was a strange post. Nobody wanted it. You stood in a dead corridor lit by 2 torches that the night staff replaced every 6 hours, and you watched a door that nobody ever came to, that nobody could open, that protected a wing nobody could enter. It was the most pointless post in the palace, and everyone knew it. They gave it to men they were punishing. Drunks, gamblers, men who'd looked at the wrong noblewoman. They gave it to me because I asked for it. I know how that sounds. Let me explain, because this is the part you actually came for, even if you don't know it yet. I asked for the West Post because of the sound. I'd been walking the night rounds, this was, the spring of my 9th year, and I passed the mouth of the West Corridor and I heard something, just for a second, a sound from behind the iron door. Behind the door, behind the boards, behind the wing that had no one in it. It was a child crying. Now you're going to want me to be dramatic about this. You're going to want me to say my blood ran cold or some such. It didn't. The first thing I felt was irritation. Genuinely. I thought some kitchen brat's gotten into the dead wing, and now I've got to file a report, and somebody's going to ask me why I didn't catch him going in. That was my first thought. A man's whole life turns on a hinge, and his first thought is paperwork. I stood there. I listened. The crying stopped. I waited maybe a quarter hour, which is a very long time to stand in a cold corridor waiting for a sound to come back, and it didn't, and I told myself I'd imagined it, and I went on with my rounds. But I didn't forget it. That's the thing about me you should write down if you're writing anything. I don't forget sounds. My mother was the same. She could hear a lie in your voice from the next room. I got the ears and not the wisdom, which is the worst inheritance a man can have. So a week later I asked the watch captain for the West Post. He looked at me like I'd asked to clean the latrines with my tongue. That post's a punishment, Vin. I told him I had trouble sleeping and the quiet suited me. He shrugged. He didn't care. Men who don't care about you will give you anything as long as it costs them nothing. That's how I came to stand in front of the iron door. The first month, nothing. I want to be honest about the nothing, because the nothing is important. People who tell these stories skip the nothing. They go straight from the strange sound to the terrible truth like there's no dead time in between. But there's always dead time. There were 30 nights where I stood in that corridor and heard the torches gutter and the wind find its way through the old stone and my own heartbeat, and nothing else. 30 nights of feeling like a fool. I'd brought myself to the most useless post in the kingdom, chasing a sound that was probably a cat or a draft or the inside of my own tired head. And then on the 31st night, I heard it again. Crying, same as before. A child. And this time I didn't feel irritation. This time I felt the cold come up through the floor and into my legs, and I understood, in a way I hadn't let myself before, that there was no child who should be in that wing, which meant there was a child who shouldn't, which meant somebody had put them there. I put my hand on the iron door. It was warm. You don't expect iron in a cold corridor to be warm. Iron takes the temperature of the air around it. But that door was warm, like something on the other side was burning or living, and I stood with my palm flat against it, and I felt, I swear this to you, and I'm an old man with no reason left to lie. I felt a small hand press back. Through the iron, from the other side, right where my hand was, a small pressure like a child finding the one warm spot in a dark room and leaning into it. I took my hand away like I'd been burnt. I didn't report it. You're going to judge me for that, go ahead. I've judged myself longer and harder than you ever could, but put yourself in that corridor. You're a door guard, a nobody. You've got a story about a crying child in a sealed wing and a warm door and a hand that pressed back. And you're going to take that to the watch captain who already thinks you're soft in the head. They'd have moved me. That's what would have happened. They'd have decided I was hearing things which I half believed myself, and they'd have moved me off the post and put some drunk back on it. And whatever was behind that door, whoever was behind that door would have gone on being behind it, alone in the dark, for the rest of their short life. And I'd never have known. So I stayed quiet. I told myself I was gathering information. That's what cowards call it when they're afraid to act, gathering information. I stood my post and I listened, and I started to keep a kind of log, in my head at first, and then on a scrap of paper I kept inside my jerkin, of when the crying came and when it stopped. It came mostly at night. Of course it did. Whoever fed them, and somebody fed them, somebody had to, came in the dead hours when the corridor guard was supposed to be at the far end of his rounds. I worked out the timing over weeks. 2 visits a night, one around the 2nd bell, one around the 5th. Each lasted perhaps 10 minutes, and they came not through my door. That lock never turned. I'd have heard it. That lock could wake the dead, but through somewhere else. There was another way into the west wing. There had to be. That was the thing that finally turned my stomach over. The flood story was a lie. The rotten foundation was a lie. The wing wasn't sealed at all. It was sealed to me and to everyone who watched the iron door, but somebody walked in and out of it twice a night, easy as breathing, through a door I couldn't see. The whole post was theater. I wasn't guarding a ruin. I was the distraction, the thing they put in front so nobody would look for the way around. You have to understand what that did to a man like me. I had built my whole self around the idea that the post meant something. That standing at a door was holy. That the king nodded at me because the work I did, invisible as it was, held the kingdom together one quiet brick at a time. And here I was learning that my post was a lie wrapped around a child's crying, and that made me a lie, and I couldn't bear it. So I found the other door. It took me 4 months. I'm not going to bore you with how. There were a lot of nights pretending to take long routes through the old service passages, mapping the dead spaces in the palace the way a man maps the inside of his own mouth with his tongue. The palace is older than anyone living. It's all built over itself, corridors that lead to walls that used to be doors, stairs that go down to rooms that got filled in with rubble 200 years ago and forgotten. I learned it. I learned it better than anyone alive, I'd wager, because I had a reason to and nothing else to do with my nights. The other way into the West Wing was through the chapel. The old chapel, the small one, the one the family stopped using when they built the grand one for show. Behind the altar there was a panel, and behind the panel a stair, and the stair went down and then along and then up, and it came out. I worked this out from the angles. I didn't dare follow it the first time. It came out inside the West Wing. And the chapel had a guard too. Of course it did. A trusted one of the king's own personal men. I won't say his name. He's dead now and his children aren't, and they didn't do anything. When I understood that, I understood the size of it. This wasn't some lone monster doing a private evil in a forgotten corner. This was organized. This had a guard rotation. This had a supply chain, who brought the food, who emptied the chamber pots, who kept the secret. This was a thing the palace did quietly, as a matter of routine, the way it laundered the linens. I sat down in the dark of that service passage and I put my head in my hands and I was sick. Actually sick on the stones. I'm not proud of it, but there's a kind of knowledge that the body rejects before the mind can even hold it, and that's what I had. My body knew before I did that I'd found something I could not unfind, and that whatever I did next, the man I'd been was already dead. Let me stop, I need water. Thank you. You're being very patient. They told me you'd be patient. They said he'll want to tell it slow, let him. So somebody's been talking about me. Of course they have. People have been talking about me for 30 years. You'd think I'd be used to it. I'm not. You never get used to being a story. Where was I? The chapel, the stair. I'm going to skip ahead now because the middle months were just me being a coward in increasingly elaborate ways, and you don't need all of them. I told myself I needed proof. I told myself I needed to know who. I told myself 100 things, and all of them were true, and all of them were excuses, because the real reason I didn't act was that I was afraid. I was afraid of dying. That's the small, ugly heart of it. A child was crying behind a wall every night, and I knew it, and I didn't move because I was afraid that if I moved, I'd die. And I'm telling you that plainly because everyone who tells these stories afterward makes themselves brave from the start, and it's a lie, and the lie does harm. It makes ordinary people think that doing right is something only brave people can do. It isn't. I wasn't brave. I was a coward who got pushed past the edge of his cowardice, which is a different thing, and I think the only honest thing, and I think it's the only kind of courage most of us will ever have. What pushed me was that the crying changed. For all those months it had been one child, one voice. I'd come to know it the way you know a voice, even through a wall, even crying. And then one night in the deep cold of midwinter there were two. A second voice, younger, new. They'd brought another one in. And I understood, standing there with my warm hand on the warm door, that this was not going to stop, that it had been going on before me and would go on after me, that there was no number of children that would be enough, that the wall would always have a voice behind it as long as I let the wall stand. And something in me that had been bending for a year finally broke, and it didn't feel like courage. It felt like falling. It felt like the moment your foot goes off the edge of the stair in the dark, and your stomach drops, and there's nothing to do anymore but hit the bottom. I went to the chapel that night. I'm not going to tell you everything about what I found down there. I've never told anyone everything, and I'm not going to start with a recorder running. Partly because it's not mine to tell, those were other people's children, other people's pain, and they're owed their privacy even now, even the dead ones, especially the dead ones. And partly because some things, once you say them out loud, they live in the room with you forever after, and I don't want them living in this room with us. You seem like a decent person. I won't do that to you. So I'll tell you the shape of it, and not the inside. The West Wing wasn't a ruin. It was kept clean, even in a terrible way, the way a thing is clean when somebody wants to be able to pretend to themselves that what they're doing isn't what it is. There were rooms. There were locks on the outside of the doors. There were children, and there had been children before these children, and there were marks on the walls where the older ones had kept count of days, the way prisoners do, and some of those counts went very high, higher than a child should ever have had to count. And there were names in the records, because that's the part that breaks you in the end. It was all written down. There was a ledger. Somebody, some careful, ordinary, evil clerk had kept a ledger, who was brought in, when, from where, and who came to visit them. I read the names of who came to visit them, and I want you to know that I have spent 30 years trying to forget those names, and I have not forgotten a single one, and 3 of them I still see at the edges of my eyes when I'm falling asleep, and one of them was a name that everyone in this kingdom knew, a name people cheered, a name on a statue. That's all I'll say about the inside. I took the ledger. That was the only smart thing I did in the whole sorry business, and I only did it by instinct. I knew, somewhere under the horror, that my word was nothing. I was a door guard. I was a nobody who'd abandoned his post to break into a sealed wing. That's how they'd tell it, and they'd be half right. If I came out of there with a story, I'd be dead by morning, and the story would die with me. The whole machine was built on the word of nobodies being worth nothing. But the ledger was their own hand, their own careful record. The very thoroughness that let them run the thing so smoothly was the rope they'd hung around their own necks if I could only get it into the right hands. So I took it. I put it inside my jerkin where I'd kept my little scrap of notes, and the weight of it against my chest was the heaviest thing I have ever carried, before or since. And I went back up the stair, and through the chapel, and I walked out into the corridor I had guarded for over a year, and I stood in front of the iron door one more time, and I put my hand flat against the warm iron, and I made a promise to whoever was on the other side that I had no idea if I could keep. Then I went to find the king. Now here's where everyone gets the story wrong. The story everyone tells, the official one, the one on the plaque, the one they'll probably read at my funeral if anybody comes, is that loyal Aldrich Venn, faithful guardsman, discovered a great evil and brought it before his king, and the good King Charles, righteous and just, was horrified and rooted out the conspiracy, and rewarded the brave soldier who'd exposed it. That's a nice story. I've let people believe it for 30 years, because the truth is worse, and helps no one, and the dead can't be hurt by a lie that flatters them. But you've come a long way, and you've been patient, and your folders got my name spelled 3 ways, so I think you already suspect. I think that's why you're really here, so I'll tell you. I didn't go to the king because I trusted him. I went to the king because of the names in the ledger, because his name wasn't in it. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Every powerful name in that palace was in those pages, every name except one. The king's own name was not there, not once, not a single visit, and a younger, more foolish me would have read that as innocence. The king didn't know, the king is clean, the king will save us. But I'd stood at doors for 11 years. I knew how power moved through that palace. I knew that the one name that should have been there, the name with the most reach and the most appetite and the most to hide, and wasn't, that the absence of that name wasn't innocence. It was the most careful thing in the whole careful ledger. He didn't visit because he didn't have to. He had the wing. He had the guards. He had the chapel stair and the flood story and the door guards like me set out front as scarecrows. You don't write your own name in the ledger when you own the ledger. You make sure the others write theirs so that you hold the rope around every neck but your own. I knew, walking through those dark corridors with the weight against my chest, that I was carrying a thing that would either save those children or get me killed, and that the man I was carrying it to was the one most likely to do the killing. And I went anyway. Not because I was brave, I keep telling you, because I had run out of doors. There was no one else above him. There was no one else to go to. The watch captain answered to him. The lords answered to him. The temple answered to him. He was the top of the only ladder I had, and a child was crying behind a wall, and so I climbed the ladder knowing the top of it might be a cliff. I caught him alone. That part was luck and timing, and a year of learning the palace's dead hours. It was near dawn. He was in the small study off the eastern apartments, the one with the bad chimney that smoked, and I think he was drinking, and I think he was alone because some part of even that man needed to be alone sometimes with what he was. I came in without being announced, which should have got me killed right there, and there were no guards because I'd learned which hours had no guards, and I put the ledger on his desk in front of him. I didn't say anything clever. I've heard versions where I make a speech. I didn't make a speech. I think I said something like, I know, just that, I know. And I stepped back out of arm's reach because I'm a coward, remember, and even in that moment my cowardice was working, keeping me alive, keeping me out of reach of his hands. He looked at the ledger. He didn't open it, he didn't need to, he knew his own ledger. And then he looked at me. I have stood in front of a great many faces in my life. The work makes you a reader of faces, even when you're pretending not to see them. And I will tell you that I have never before or since seen a face do what is did in that moment. It wasn't fear. I'd expected fear. It wasn't anger, though that came later. It was, I've spent 30 years looking for the word and the closest I've got is relief. He looked relieved. Like a man who has carried something so long and so far that the only feeling left when he's finally caught is gratitude that the carrying is over. I didn't understand it then. I understand it better now. Now that I'm old and I've carried my own weight for 30 years. I understand that there's a kind of evil that doesn't want to be evil, that's trapped inside the thing it's doing and can't find the door out, and is almost grateful to anyone who comes to drag it into the light. Not because it's good. Don't mistake me, because it's tired. He could have killed me. He had every reason to, and the means, and he was within his rights as king to do anything he wanted to a guard who'd broken into his study at dawn. One shout and I was a dead man and a forgotten one. He didn't shout. He poured a second cup and he pushed it across the desk to me and his hand was shaking. The king's hand, shaking. And he said, and this is the only line of that whole night I'm completely sure of, because it's carved into me, he said. How long have you known? And I said, long enough to be ashamed of how long. And he nodded, the same nod, the little tip of the head he gave the guards in the corridor. He gave it to me across that desk like an acknowledgement that the furniture had feelings after all, and I tell you my legs nearly went out from under me, because I understood that he was the monster and he was also the man who'd nodded at me for 9 years, and both of those were true at once, and the world doesn't prepare you for a thing being two things at once. What happened next is the part the official story gets least wrong, which is strange. He didn't fight it. I keep coming back to that because it's the thing nobody believes. They want him to be cornered, threatened, forced. They want the brave soldier to back the wicked king against a wall. But it wasn't like that. Once the ledger was on the desk, once it was real and outside his own head and sitting in another man's knowledge, something in him just folded. Like the whole structure of his life had been a held breath and I'd let it out. He emptied the West Wing. He did it himself mostly in the next 3 days, with a small number of men I'd never met and never saw again. The children went somewhere. I was told later that they went somewhere safe to people who could care for them, under names that hid where they'd been so that no shame would follow them. I have chosen to believe that. I have needed to believe that the way you need air. I never tried to find out if it was true, because if it wasn't, I could not have gone on living, and so I made myself a careful, deliberate fool about it, and I've stayed one, and I'll thank you not to disturb it. The names in the ledger, those visitors, those cheering, statued, beloved names, they fell, over the following year, one at a time, in ways that looked like accident and scandal and natural justice, and never once looked like a king cleaning out the people who could destroy him. He was very good at it. He'd had a lifetime of practice at making evil look like the weather. He just pointed that talent in a different direction. And the man whose name was on a statue, that statue came down. They said it was structural. They said the foundation was rotten. It's always a rotten foundation. Have you noticed that? Every time they bury something, the story is rotten foundations and floods, as if the buildings themselves are trying to confess. And me. You want to know about me? Why he raised me up? That's the question in your folder, isn't it? Why King Charles elevated the soldier who exposed the palace's darkest hidden secret. I've seen it written that way. Such a clean sentence. Such a heroic shape to it. Here's the truth, and it's the last truth I've got, and then I'm tired and you can turn off your recorder. He didn't raise me up to reward me. He raised me up to hold me. Think about it. Think it through the way I had 30 years to. I was the one man alive outside his small circle of silent men who knew the whole of it, who'd seen the inside of the West Wing, who'd read the ledger before he took it back and burned it. I was a loose thread, and a king does not leave loose threads, even a tired king, even a king who feels relief at being caught. He had two choices for what to do with me. He could kill me quiet, easy, a door guard who fell drunk down a stair, nobody would blink. Or he could bind me so close and so high that my silence became my own survival, make me a captain, then a commander, then a man with lands and a title and a seat near the throne, make me rich, make me known. Make me invested, so that the truth coming out would destroy me right alongside him, so that every honor he draped on me was another chain making certain I'd keep his secret to protect my own new self. That's why I rose. Not because I was good, because I was dangerous and he found a way to make my danger work for him instead of against him, and the way he found was kindness, and the kindness was real and it was a cage, both at once, the way he was a monster and the man who nodded, both at once. I let him do it, that's my last confession. I let him chain me with honors because I was afraid, the same fear that had kept me at the door for a year, the fear that never left me my whole life. I took the title. I took the lands. I let them carve the plaque. I let the kingdom believe in brave Aldrich Venn. And every year I let it, I sank a little deeper into the lie, until the lie was a tower I lived in and couldn't climb down from without the fall killing me. He died first. Old in his bed, mourned, beloved. They built him a statue too, it's still standing. Its foundation, I'm sure, is excellent. And I went on being the brave soldier of the story for 30 more years, because by then there was no other man left for me to be. So, there's your answer. Why did the king elevate the soldier who exposed the secret? Because the secret was the king's. Because elevation was the quietest grave he could dig for a witness. Because the only thing more useful than a dead hero is a living one who can never, ever tell the truth without burying himself. I'm telling you now because I'm dying. The physicians give me a season, maybe two. There's no title left to protect, no self left worth saving, no king left to bind me. The chains only work on the living. So at the very end of it I get to be, for one afternoon in this small room with your kind face and your recorder, the thing I never got to be for the rest of my life. A man who told the truth. Not a brave one. I keep saying I was never brave. I was a coward who heard a child crying through a wall and couldn't, in the end, walk away from the sound. That's all I ever was. That's the whole of it. Put that on the plaque if you want. He couldn't walk away from the sound. The rest is rotten foundations. Now turn it off, I'm tired. And I think I'd like to sit a while in the quiet, with my hand warm, and remember that for 1 year of my long and cowardly life, I stood in a cold corridor and was the only soul in the whole wide palace who answered when a child cried. That's the part I'll keep. You can have the rest.